You are listening to the Enormocast.
Hey there. Well, you still have Vanessa's sexy voice ringing in your head. And before you've started to furiously press the +10 on your phone, don't do it. Stop. Remember, there's a couple ways to help out some climbers out there and help out the Enormocast and get cool shit sent right to your door. Go to belayspecs.com and enter Enormocast at checkout for a discount on those glasses that will save your neck. And or go to peterwgilroy.com for climbing-inspired jewelry, accessories for both men and women, all handmade by Peter Gilroy, a climber. And enter Enormo at checkout for a discount and to help the podcast. So remember, belayspecs.com, Enormocast at checkout, or peterwgilroy.com, enter Enormo at checkout. All right, next commercial. No, wait. Just listen. Don't press the forward button. Not yet. Just listen. Come on. There's a long list of things that can cause you to fail on a climb. Fear, weak forearms, the moonshine the rando from Kentucky was passing around the fire last night. But you should never have to blame your shoes. And in a recent survey, podcast air quotes, Sportivas were the least likely shoe to be angrily whipped across a bouldering cave by that sweaty dude who thinks that blue V4 is totally V6. From legends like the Mira to the Spry Otaki, Sportiva designs and builds climbing shoes to be loved, cradled, and cherished, not slammed in the dirt at the base of your proj in disgust. So if you want love, not hate, get on the good foot by swiping right to Sportiva.com or your nearest climbing retailer to check out the little bundles of love for your feet. Sportiva is a proud sponsor of the Enormocast.
Listen, where are you playing in town? Are you playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah, the big
house.
place, that side of town. That's a big
nice.
place. You sold it out. 20,000 seats.
You really should.
The hell are you doing? I couldn't sleep. I'm checking the ropes. There was a frayed end on your rope, and I'm cutting it out. Bad weather. No, later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is March 12th, about 9:30, and on today's show, episode 124 of the Enormocast, a conversation with sport climbing legend Boone Speed. Sport climbing's been around long enough to have legends, and he's one of them. And actually, he's kind of a bouldering legend, and he's also a gym climbing legend in a way, having been one of the founders of Pusher Holds, who were sort of the first modern hold company. So yeah, 3-time legend, this guy. That's who we're talking to today, Boone Speed. And again, this one's a little bit late. I warned on the last show that it would be because I took the family to Spain, packed it up, normal baby, grandma, a normal mama. We all went to Spain for a couple weeks, and it turned out awesome. And, we were pretty psyched we did it, even though it was full of heavy baby tax, as I like to say. The baby tax, the extra time, effort, lack of sleep, and all the things that go with having a baby were kind of amplified when you're in another country and you're on jet lag and everything else. But pretty stoked. We had a great time over there, and I got out climbing like more than 1 or 2 days in a row, which has not been happening a lot in the last couple of years. So forgive me for being a few days late with the Enormocast. You guys are used to it anyway. I just had a pretty damn good excuse this time, so I thought I would bring it up. Okay, the only small bit of business to talk about this time around is just I want to thank Black Diamond for being on board for another year. They've been the longest standing sort of paid advertisers on the show, and very, very much strong supporters, not just the not just the business, but I know a lot of the employees over there are listening and really enjoy the show. So just want to give a shout out to those guys because I don't know if we'd be here without them stepping up a few years ago and really supporting the show. So thanks again to Black Diamond. And that's it for today. Let's go on to Boone Speed, the Boone Speed interview. I was very happy that Boone agreed to sit down for the Enormocast. He wasn't really aware of what it was, but he was game. And the interview, I think, turned out really great. I enjoyed the hell out of it. And it kind of reminds me a bit of the Randy Levitt interview. And even though Boone wasn't necessarily a personal inspiration to me at the time, the way Randy was, he really frames himself in the history of it. He's not afraid to talk about having put that influence in there. He's not cocky, but he's also not overly modest, and I appreciate that kind of attitude. Anyway, a good nitty-gritty climbing interview, this one. So I hope you guys enjoy it. The conversation with Boone Speed. I want to start by asking you what climbing is to you now. We're going to spend, I hope, a little time on your history, and your relationship to Salt Lake City and this area. But what is climbing to you nowadays?
For sure, climbing changed my life, and I hold climbing as an activity and also the climbing community in the highest esteem. I think it's a very special, unique activity that is actually, there's almost no learning curve to actually having a great time on your very first time out. Mm-hmm. It's not like sliding on snow or golfing or surfing or something that's where you just can't do it on your first day. Like anyone can climb on their very first day and enjoy it and have the same experiences as the best climber in a way. You're overcoming your own fears and like insecurities or you're in a tough spot, right? And
right.
You kind of overcome it. But it's an innate movement. It's kind of like walking down a sidewalk, I think. Mm-hmm. So I think that's not really answering your question. So you can just edit that out.
There's no editing on the Enormocast. In fact, the running joke of the show is that as soon as one of us says that's going to get edited out, it means it's staying.
It's staying.
So you just, yeah.
No, I just jinxed it.
No, you're answering my question.
So it's complicated. Climbing it's right up there with my favorite things to do. I am completely at peace when I'm climbing. At this point in my life, I've done it so much and I've been around it for such a long time that I have other interests that pull me. And right now, the one, I've always been a creative guy. I grew up in a house in an artistic oriented house. My father was an artist. My mother's extremely creative, and that was going to be my path. That's been an underlying influence and a passion of mine, regardless of what I'm doing to stay physically fit or for excitement, right? So I went from skiing to climbing, and now my thing is surfing, but they all share a sort of similar exploratory quality and moving around the earth. Right now, I have to say, and I have to be completely honest, I would rather be closer to the ocean than the mountains. And it's just because I've been around the mountains for my whole life. And so exploring the coastlines is new to me and refreshing and frankly warmer. And, it's like it's easier on my joints and my body, right? But as that relates to climbing, exploring the coastlines in places like Majorca and, Venezuela and these places where there's climbing right on the ocean mm-hmm. is like the greatest. It's like the greatest thing ever, right?
Sure.
So climbing, the act of climbing is like, it's my peace. It's mm-hmm. I'm right at home when I'm in the middle of it, and I love it.
And your wife climbs.
My wife climbs.
You guys met through climbing?
Yeah. Well, we met, yes, through climbing, but also through mutual friends, and we've mm-hmm. kind of orbited around each other for many, many years. Okay. And I've been a good friend of her brother's for a long time, and I've known Bailey, Chris Bailey forever, and we're like kindred spirits,
Great. Well, so in terms of like even just moving away from the philosophical part of it, what do you do with your climbing time these days? And how much is there? Is there like a big drag between the two? is she still climbing and you're surfing?
No,
are you guys all doing all this stuff
No,
together?
we're doing the exact same things together. I mean,
Okay.
we just spent 3 weeks in Mexico surfing, and we're both dying to get back there and surf more. But that said, if I didn't have a hurt finger, I'd be just as fired up to go climbing right now. So, I'm still susceptible to injuries, and I have a hurt finger right now, and it's really frustrating.
Right.
I'm mystified by the problem that I have in my finger, and it's not seeming to get better, and so it's really frustrating. So, surfing is the better call. But we were tracking to climb hard this autumn and springtime and summer. And we just have to split our time. I mean, look, I did my best climbing. I'm never going to do as good a climbing as I did, when I was in the right place at the right time in my mid-20s, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me nowadays, I'm excited to go out and I want to be 8A fit. I want to be able to climb 8A wherever I'm at.
Sure.
And that's typically some limestone or sport climbing crag someplace, And if I can eke out a few harder routes, that's great. But the thing is that the amount of dedication that it takes me to climb a really hard route, I just feel like at this point in my life, it's better to spend that time doing something that's more. I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to chase my past.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I feel like if I can be a recreational climber and climb 8As, that opens up a lot of terrain for me, and makes me feel good.
It does. So you can do it.
So I can do that,
Okay, cool.
and I love that.
Right.
But, I have a couple of hard routes I'd still like to get done.
Sure.
But when I think about, spending a month, let's say I want to go back and do Necessary Evil, which is like all my old buddies are like, you got to go back and do that route. And it's like, it's like sometimes I think about that. But the reality of it is, would I rather spend a month in St. George trying to do Necessary Evil, or would I rather spend a month, if I've got a month to do something, would I rather go to surfing for a month in Indonesia? The answer, quite honestly, is probably I'd rather be in Indo.
Yeah, no, I think I just flash to the cold weather temps and the highway and the noise and like you and like 10 other dudes like all giving your burns on that thing. Yeah, no, I think your Indonesia idea is much better.
It just seems like better spent at this time.
Yeah, well,
at this point in my life.
How much time have you spent at that cliff?
Yeah, a lot.
Right.
And the thing is like that route is, that route, Andra did it in 45 minutes.
Right.
And so, and that's the state of the art right now. You know what I mean? Like it's a route that grade has been on-sighted multiple times. Mm-hmm. And so what difference does it make if I do it or not? It doesn't, I'm grateful for the moment in this, I'm grateful for for my place in the history of the sport, and I consider myself really lucky to have been there.
Well, let's seg into that actually, because we're in Salt Lake City actually, which was sort of your old stomping grounds. I actually thought you lived here still, which you don't. You live up in Portland at the moment.
I've lived in Portland kind of on and off since the late 90s.
Okay.
And I've been there like full time since mid 2000s.
But you grew up in this area.
I grew up in Utah. Yep.
Okay. And
down by American Fort Canyon.
Okay. So let's kind of put that in perspective. In my perspective, I started climbing about 1989. You were a little before that, I think. We're about 5 years difference, I think, in age. Not that matters when you start, but I was like this dyed-in-the-wool traddy from the beginning. And basically, though, sport climbing didn't exist at the time both of us started. Yeah. And you guys in your cohorts, and I'd love to talk about some of the folks you were climbing with too here, were on this really first wave of American sport climbing. Yeah. Isolated pockets of it, still, could result in angry words, if not fists, in certain parts of the country. So can you sort of put your beginning in perspective and maybe how that drew you in, this idea of bolting an American fork and all those sorts of things? What were the influences that got you not just into climbing, because that's probably a short story, but how was it that while I was like steeped in the wool, with trad climbing at the exact same moment over here, you guys were, whoa, this is what I want to do? Because I think my path was probably more common at the time.
With all due respect to pioneers like Steve Hong and Leighton Core and these dudes in the desert and Merrill Bitter and Steve Carruthers and all these guys, with all due respect to them, climbing was pretty sleepy otherwise in Utah at the time. And it was like, you'd read a climbing magazine and it was all Colorado. There was a bunch of stuff in the news about Devil's Tower and about the Shawangunks and about Joshua Tree in Yosemite at the time, obviously. And Smith Rock was just starting to come up. Mm-hmm. And those were the places that people read about. There was very little happening other than Fallen Arches. I remember being blown away when it was like, oh, there's a 513 in the state of Utah. Wow. And that seemed really cool in the mid 80s when I started climbing. We had a bunch of scrappy little crappy rocks where I started climbing down in Provo. Uh-huh. And the very first day I went, we threw the dude I was with threw a little top rope up on this quartzite wall, and there was a guy underneath I was like, what's that guy doing? And it was like, he's bouldering. And it was a guy that became a really good friend of mine, Jeff Pedersen, who's had a pretty, it has a really strong imprint on the sport as well, actually. And he was bouldering, and it was all about just the movement of climbing. And so this is the very first impression that I had of climbing. And there was no majestic lines. It was like, oh, I can throw a top rope up on this 30-foot piece of quartzite, or I can boulder half that height without any of this other stuff on. And this is like 1985. And so, I made friends with Pedersen, and I made friends with a guy, an older dude who had boundless energy. I was, almost about 20 years old at the time, and this guy Bill Boyle, who was in his mid 30s, and there was a bunch of other people, but the three of us kind of were, over the course of the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, we were kind of the main threesome that kind of went out, and we each kind of had a role we each kind of found our. Mm-hmm. It's like the Beatles, or it's any kind of. It was just good chemistry, and right. we all, if you compared it to a band, it would like we all had our place in the band, right? And mine was definitely like, I can do harder climbing than anyone around me, kind of, and it was like it was a really a big confidence booster for me, and it just seemed climbing just what seemed difficult. When I looked around, I was like, this isn't hard, actually. Right. this is like just not that hard. And so, hard climbing became something that I found solace in, and a lot of self-confidence, and then we started developing, kind of ferreting out little routes in these little places. Mm-hmm. And this is before the power drill and all this stuff. And, right. And there was no resistance to it. Nobody was like, this has been wrap bolted, or this has been such right. and such. And we, my buddy, Jeff and Bill and I were down in Utah Valley, down by American Fork, down in Provo. And then there was the Salt Lake contingent, which consisted of Conrad Anker and guys like that. And
Muggs was up here, right?
Muggs was up here, but he wasn't bolting as much as guys like Dana Hauser and Merrill Bitter and Conrad Anker. They were really prominent guys doing a lot of the bolting up here, and the guidebook authors, Stuart Ruckman, especially. And over a couple of years, we started to compare notes, and the guys from Salt Lake would come to Provo and try our routes, and we'd go up to Salt Lake and try their routes, and there was a lot of camaraderie, and there was never like, oh, this got wrap bolted, or this is, and it was like really weird time when there were sport routes, and you would have bolts in them, but you would also have like this odd, life, like life and death piece of pro that was like an HB,
right?
Like stuck in, that you'd have like stuck in this little quartzite crack. I mean, it was a really weird time,
right?
And we were just making it up as we go. Right. We didn't have the constraints or the history of these that was constraining us in any way. Right. And guys like Muggs and these old, these seasoned alpinists were 100% behind it. Like they came out and enjoyed the fruits of our labors. You know what I mean? Like somebody Conrad would rap bolt something and call it, something like Rebel Yell. And it became, 25 dudes would line up to do it and just like hoot and holler and try to get it done. You know what I mean? And
yeah, I guess there wasn't like the weight of a place like Boulder or whatever.
I can still remember those letters to the editor in climbing magazines that you used to pore over, and it was Christian Griffith versus Mark Wilford in this war of words, this written war of words, and the stories that I'd heard about in California that and I ended up becoming friends with all these guys.
Well, yeah, it all mellowed
from Backer to Wilford and Christian, and all these guys were all at the end of the day. I guess it's a little bit like politics, you're all behind the scenes. Everyone's just like shaking hands and kind of enjoying a beer together. Eventually, yeah.
I don't know if it was quite that smooth out there in Boulder, but well, it wasn't. We know there was things happening to each other and bolts getting chopped and flattened and blah blah blah. But so you mentioned a couple things when you were talking earlier about climbing now, and when you were just talking about like that you found that you were good at it. And you mentioned this idea of like you were finding solace in it, you were finding self-confidence in it. What were you like as a kid is that just, you're talking about normal teenage angst or was there was this like something that you were sort of...
How deep do you want to go, dude?
Well, we can, go a little way.
Well, I grew up as I feel like I grew up as a bit of a misfit.
Okay.
I had a funny name. I grew up in it.
Dude, actually, I was going to actually open this with asking you if you, like, ever wake up wondering if you can live up to your name. You have an awesome name. You have, like, the most awesome name ever.
Well, I
get it. If you're a kid, it's probably not the most awesome name.
I don't...
But as an adult, seriously, sir, your name is awesome.
I'm proud of my name, and it's been probably one of the greatest... I mean, it's been a great gift from my parents. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But it was tough. I was a skinny kid who grew up in a fairly small home. I have one sibling that died and another younger sister who's quite a bit younger than I am. And it was, and I grew up in a very small conservative town, blue collar area of north of Provo, between Provo and Salt Lake. And I feel like my teenage years, junior high and early high school, were extremely difficult for me, and I wasn't super confident, and this is just that's just being frank,
right?
And then coupled with growing up in a Mormon, my parents were Mormons, and I was raised as a Mormon kid, and it's. I mean, no secret, I, questioned all that and kind of didn't make that much sense to me. And that was that. But all of those things kind of happening around the same time, right? 15, 16 years old. And, I didn't have a lot of personal struggle with any of that stuff as much. I guess my parents raised me to be really confident. They always told me I could do whatever I wanted, and they were extremely positive and extremely supportive. But socially, I felt like a misfit, and that was extremely difficult for me, at least personally. That was the hard part. It's like it was never my own self-confidence. It was more like I always felt like an outcast. And the thing is like I probably was, and I probably should have been. Honestly, I've always been a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. And these cohort, you mentioned that you were climbing with, were these guys your same age, or was there an age difference?
So Bill Boyle was 35 years old,
right? And
I think he just wanted. I mean, this is back when nobody was climbing. Sure. You know what I mean? This is back. My first pair of shoes were Firays, and that was like there was like 2 shoes on the market, right? Mm-hmm. Well, 3 EBs, Firays, and some like the purple Le Menestrels, so Sportivas,
right.
And it was just a super small group of people. There's no climbing gyms, no way to get into it. So it was really accidental, I think, in a lot of ways that we all got into it. And so we ended up climbing together because that, it's like that's who was climbing. And we were all able to climb sort of 5'11" and 5'12s when that seemed to be a big deal, believe it or not.
Yeah. No, we believe it.
I mean, people nowadays can't believe that. People start on 5'11". And I mean, people were getting, credited with on-sighting 12 Bs, like in the press.
Certainly.
Back in 85.
Yeah. No, we've gone down that road on this show over and over again.
Over and over.
Yeah, because I'm that guy. Like, I mean, I'm a little bit behind you, but yeah, you didn't just go and climb 5'11" out of the gates.
No.
Like, that was insane.
Yeah,
So-
you knew everybody's name in town that could climb 5'11".
Right. Yeah, all 6 of them or 4
Yeah.
of them, whatever
Yeah.
it happened to be, right?
Yeah.
No, I think it's interesting still that, the grade kind of thing has just gotten sort of nuts. But I wanted to ask you, though, with that, like, you're this kid, you've got, whatever issues you're dealing with. All of a sudden, and this is something I'm always interested in when I hear about it, is like, you're all of a sudden hanging out with these adults.
Kind of, yeah.
And I don't know, I find that kind of interesting in climbing, and it's gone on forever. It still goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Although, another thing we talked about on the show a lot is that it seems like it's a kid's sport these days because of the gyms, but it was really an adult sport.
Yeah.
In the 90s and the 80s and what, I mean, it was like, it was not for kids.
When
but,
you had to go through some kind of an apprenticeship, right? You needed to find a mentor, and you needed to go through this apprenticeship, and it was like dangerous. And now the learning curve is accelerated. It's just like, it took me a long time, even as an adult, to like accept the idea of falling, because I spent the first 4 or 5 years of my climbing career trying to avoid falling. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because you didn't necessarily just want to take 30 footers on gear all the time.
No,
I mean, it wasn't routine.
He still don't.
You watch these kids go up, and, these guys at Oleana are just like going 20 feet between bolts, just like with complete disregard for any sort of, doesn't seem like they're scared. It doesn't seem like they care about whipping 40 feet or any of that stuff,
Do you still have that? This is an aside, but do you still have that floating around in your brain? Because I do.
It's definitely
I still
hardwired.
don't like to fall. I mean, I don't want to run out 20 feet on a sport route, even if it's steep, even if everything around me tells me it's like I can lob off of this thing, no problem. I still get
on
gripped.
site. I get scared. You know what I mean? Like on site, I'm still quite nervous. Getting run out that far. Once I'm red pointing, it's just like I'm completely robotic, and I don't think about it at all.
So let's kind of fast forward a little bit to like past this apprenticeship, past these like early days, into when you and again some cohorts were kind of the vanguard of like hard sport climbing in the United States.
Well, I mean, for sure, guys like Christian Griffith and Alan Watts up in Smith Rock, started that process in America, and Randy Levitt to a certain degree out in California at the time. And there were people that we were reading about that were doing this. And then of course the magazines we were reading a lot about the Europeans, Patrick, Wolfgang, all these, Jerry Moffat, all these cats that were, sport climbing just seemed like the way. Mm-hmm. And going back just a little bit, never once did anyone ever, when I was learning how to climb, ever once was hanging and lowering to the ground even considered. It just didn't, it never occurred to us. It's like, who made that rule up? That doesn't seem, when I heard about it, I was like, oh, that would have never occurred to me. Like if I fall off on a top rope trying to do something, I just hang there and try to figure it out and carry on.
Right. So you're talking about, and like to frame it again, and every once in a while this comes up on the show, but it's like ancient history to a time when you were not allowed to hang there and try the moves. You were supposed to, if you fell, you lost the game. You
lowered to the ground.
The mountain defeated you, and now you have to give it a fair chance by going back to the ground, AKA hang dogging. Like hang dogging, which is a word that is being lost in the mists of time, because dogging, I guess you still call it, but it used to be a pejorative.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you were not supposed to do it.
Right.
But once again, you guys are in this like isolated zone
where
nobody's telling you what the hell you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're free to just climb the way we think it should be done. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward to this really important moment in history that I think a lot of people sort of go, aha, that makes sense. Christian and Alan and all those guys were doing all of their development and kind of in their own way with hand drills. So they were hanging there and banging out these things. The electric drill, the Bosch, had probably the single biggest impact on the evolution of the sport. Mm-hmm. And it hit Europe, and Europe introduced it to us within 6 months. And we were off and running. I wanted to move at some point, maybe in like the late 80s, 88, 89, I was becoming a good climber, and I was, already climbing 513. And that was a big deal.
Early 20s at that point?
Early 20s at that point. And that was when 513 was still a big deal. And, it was like, there's a few people, I guess, that would argue that. But there was a couple, 3 8B pluses in the world, 14As, right? Mm-hmm. And you could name them. And other than that, it was like 513. And 13C was like, you're a world-class climber at this point in time. And 13D for sure. And there was a couple of 14As out there, That was between like 84 and 88. And then we got introduced to the Bosch, mm-hmm. and it opened up all this new terrain. And so around 87, 88, I was on my way to becoming a good climber, and this is something that I wanted to pursue. And I wanted to move to El Dorado Canyon. I wanted to move to Boulder. I wanted to move to a place like Smith Rock, in theory, right? But my life was here in Utah, and I was studying graphic design at the time, and I had a life here. And we started to look around for rocks locally, and it's like, is there any climbing in American Fork maybe, and so Jeff Pedersen and I went up there, and over the course of 6 months sort of ferreted out a few routes, and there were a couple of other dudes that were helping us, and there was some fits and starts, and some it wasn't quite so succinct as the way I'm presenting it, but mm-hmm. but in the winter I put down my ice tools, and we went down to Red Rocks, and we developed the Wall of Confusion, where Fear and Loathing is, and the Gift, and the Gallery mm-hmm. Wall. And that was really the beginning of kind of like grid bolting in a way. We just went down there with this power drill and kind of did that. And the guys would yell at us from the road, honestly, and be like, we're chopping your bolts and stuff like this. So
you finally got your toe into that scene by getting out of
and that was a big deal. And then we kind of and it was, if you've ever, and a lot of people have been to the gallery at Red Rocks, and it is a perfect sort of scenario for that sort of, it's a perfect indoor crag, right? And it's just a perfect scene for that. But we took that idea back to a few of these walls in American Fork, and we thought that there might be 25, 30 routes up there that would, and we thought that there would be 513s in American Fork, and that's really what we were looking for.
Right.
And within 6 months of really developing American Fork, we found the Hell Cave, and the Hell Cave was kind of, this extremely steep, it might have been the steepest crag in the world at the time. I'm not sure that it was, but it might have been. And the way that we bolted that was on ladders. And so it was the power drill and ladders. Otherwise, the Hell Cave doesn't get done in the olden days. Right. In 1986, you're not developing the Hell Cave without a power drill. You know what I mean?
Well, no, that was, the thing is that, sport climbing, it didn't just pop in its form that is in today.
Yeah.
Even the guys like Christian, they had kept all this stuff from that was leaking over from track climbing to where they were bolting routes, but they were bolting them ground up. And the people, again, like sport climbing in a lot of ways was a pejorative as well.
Yeah.
And so they, because it's all bolts, they started to get, in their grill. But you go up on some of those routes, and like you mentioned, wanting to move to El Dorado Canyon, and like some of those routes that were so controversial are totally terrifying.
Yeah.
Like they're super
like Paris
widely,
Girl.
like Paris Girl. They're like widely spaced bolts. You're gonna ground from like 40 feet up.
Same at Smith, man. People talk about that.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of them, not in Eldo, but other places, whether it's Smith or the Verdun, like the early Patrick routes are terrifying.
Yeah.
You know, you got to be, when you're climbing like there, you got to make sure you look at the date.
Yeah.
Because you're going to go down, you're going to see some bolts, but they're going to be really far apart. And they're not going to be on the crux. That's the other funny thing. Because they couldn't stop and drill on the crux.
Yeah.
So the days of like the perfectly placed crux bolt, that didn't exist.
Yeah.
It's like terrifying.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, things like it still did ease in to what you guys were doing up there, and you can't hand drill on upside down climbing.
No.
I mean, you can, but you need a ladder.
I mean, you can now because we figured out ways to do it. So like
who would?
Kurt Smith did a bunch of ground up development at Rifle. I mean, it becomes like, is it easier to go from the ground up and drill a bolt ladder,
I'm talking about
hang or any of that stuff? Yeah, and there's just no way you were going to do that.
It's hard enough with a power
and
drill.
And the thing is, you have to realize that it took 100 routes in American Fork before we actually even considered the Hell Cave as even viable. It's not like you go from bouldering in Little Cottonwood Canyon at the gate boulders on these old Steve Honk problems to straight into the Hell Cave.
Right.
And going, this is amazing climbing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you have to take baby steps, and the overhanging climbing at the gallery. And, you know, I mean, when Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, that route, that 12A out there, it's like, that seemed, we were wondering if it was even feasible
to climb
when
it.
we put bolts in it. And of course it is. It's like, but when that's the steepest route you've ever seen in your life, that's new. You know, it's like, it seems absurd, you know? It overhangs like 40 feet in 70, you know, and you're like, holy cow.
What I'm trying to like, I don't want to get caught on this too much, but I'm trying to picture the ladders, what you guys are up to. It's not very tall.
So it's not very tall.
So, but
and the ground kind of follows. The ground kind of follows it up, right? So it was a combination of ladders, hanging on hooks, aiding out what's called Wasatch Reality as a crack, and then putting some bolts in from the top down. And it's basically just engineering these routes however you can, and again making it up as you go. And so in the case of Utah, what really got everything, gave it another major kickstart was. That was just a complete coincidence, was the 1988 snowbird competition that the entire world came to. And Trudeau and Rabotu and Patrick and the best climbers in the world, the ones that you read about in the magazines, all came to this little sleepy joint. And the best thing that they had to do was they'd heard about American Fork, and they went down, and, you know, a lot of these routes, they got first descents on because they hadn't been done yet.
Right.
You know, it was like 8As and 8A pluses and stuff like that. And that really, you know, all these things happen, and then you end up with this like legendary spot, right?
Yeah.
You don't set out to make a legendary spot. I mean, we were just basically polishing turds. That's what we had. And then we did the best with what we did. And ultimately, I think that if American Fork and those early days of developing in American Fork did anything, it was that guys like Porter Gerard, who went, you know, he went, well, we've got some untapped potential in the Red River Gorge. And, you know what I mean? Like, guys went back to their homes, and, you know, Rifle came after, you know, it's like they'd been ice climbing in Rifle, and then all of a sudden Rifle looks pristine compared to American Fork, and it's like, and longer and better, you know what I mean? And so guys all of a sudden took what they'd learned from American Fork and applied it to all these other crags that are arguably miles better, you know what I mean? But and then you know, a year later we started developing southwest Utah.
Yeah, so down by what we were talking about earlier, the
Gorge,
VRG and stuff like that.
VRG and all those, you know, Black and Tan and all those things were, it was like an Easter egg hunt out there for amazing limestone.
So how long would you say like this, you know, seeking new cliffs, bolting was dominating your life?
10 years.
10 years. So like through what, your 20s into your 30s?
Yeah, basically, I mean, it was probably seeking new cliffs and developing these areas, and not routes, but areas, was a major focus in my life from probably 88 until 95 and in 97 even, and 98, because that trailed off into developing bouldering areas like Joe's Valley and Ibex and things like that.
Right. So in terms of your background, the conservative, you grew up Mormon, you've got a father who's what's his first name?
Ulysses Speed.
Oh, that's right. I read that the other day and I was like, whoa.
He was born and raised in Texas. He was an honest a true cowboy. And so that's another interesting part of my being a little bit of a renegade climber. I never got heat from my parents.
Okay, that's what I was going to get to. Is like, what were their ideas about this way that you were expressing yourself? Okay,
they were extremely proud of my career and my. They've been nothing but supportive of my sort of life off the beaten track. And we've really never ever really, the subject of religion hasn't really ever come up.
Okay, I was going to ask you. You've walked away from that.
Yeah, and for me, it was a little bit like, kind of like the day that you learn that there is no Santa Claus. You don't ruminate over that, right? You're 5. You're like, there's no Santa Claus, and I'm bummed.
Yeah.
It's like you don't sit and ruminate over it for a long time. You know what I mean? It doesn't. You look at it and you go, oh yeah, of course there's no Santa Claus. It doesn't make any sense to me. Right. You know, like you don't sit and wish that it was true. It was
for the rest of your life.
Yeah, for the rest of your life. It's just like, for me, that was sort of the way that I dealt with the way I wanted to proceed in my life. And I have, I want to try to stay as respectful as possible, because there's a lot of respect in my family, and I have extended family, and people are free. This is a free. I mean, I guess unless you're Muslim, it's free to worship the way you want. You know what I mean? And I mean that as a joke. That was dark, very dark.
Yeah, no, we understand the political climate right now.
It's a time-stamped statement, right? But people are free to worship the way that they want and make however they get through their life.
And when you said they were proud of your career, what was your life looking like in those 10 years? I mean,
I went to work for Black Diamond.
Okay, you were working for BD.
So I studied graphic design.
Because we still didn't really have much of a framework for a professional climber at that point.
No, and the thing is like, it didn't ever really make sense for me to, shoe contracts were coming with like $50 a month, gas money or whatever.
Right, and some shoes,
that's not really going to work for me.
Right.
So, we've come a long way, and people can make a living wage, and even like head route setters in 2016 are making a living wage, a real legitimate wage. Climbers can make a living climbing, and that's great. It wasn't like that when I was climbing. I think, Lynn Hill deservedly, made a living at climbing, and a decent one, I think, and a few of the Europeans. But a lot of people...
I feel like Lynn's, the possibilities were her. She had those roots in Europe in terms of...
Well, she also did the nose, and she did, and she was great. And she was friggin' Lynn Hill. I mean, she's a total badass, and she was, deserving of everything that she got, and that's great. But it wasn't like that for me. I always aspired to more than... I don't need much in my life. I don't necessarily care too much about accumulation of stuff, but I need to be creative. I need to be stimulated. I love cities as much as I love the hills, the mountainsides, and the coastlines. I find a lot of adventure in cities. I need art in my life and culture, and things like that. And it's important. There's a balance that I didn't really ever just want to live out of a tent my whole life.
Sure.
Even though I'm okay with the simple life, I don't need more than a tent. It's just that it's a fine balance, right? It's like it's on my rest days I wanted to do something meaningful, which was help design shoes and carabiners and gear. And that's what I did for Black Diamond, is help to steer the sport from a marketing standpoint and a gear development standpoint and things like that.
Well, when you said that, it sort of occurred to me, not necessarily for the first time, I don't know, but is that the other thing that happened with sport climbing a little bit and with bouldering, because you were just talking about also, you guys were on kind of a wave of when bouldering became a thing of its own sort of its own genre, if you will, of climbing or whatever. But that made this generation, and we talk about the gym generations now, coming that who've never even climbed outside, but you guys kind of broke that mountain man mold. You broke a little bit, not you specifically, but that your generation of like early sport climbers, like that you were, some sort of, hardy mountain man that would just as soon, live in a cave than participate in society. But, a lot like skate culture like that brought music in a way to the scene.
We were super influenced by that.
Yeah. Yep. And you guys, you didn't go into the mountains for 3 weeks to get your route done. You went for the afternoon and climbed. And like, in a lot of ways, it was a new cultural way of looking at climbing.
For sure.
That you could have your toes in all these different things versus like, I'm like this crusty mountain man that's gonna, come back with a beard and a wild look in my eyes after going out climbing.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. I mean, I always joked, I want to sleep in my bed at night. You know what I mean? I want to try to crush these sport climbs or these boulders or whatever. And I want to, go hang with my friends and have a nice dinner and sleep in my bed, and it's not like I need it's not like I need pampering. It's just, that was just the climbing wasn't, you're right. It wasn't, I don't need to it doesn't need to be a 3-week beard growing endeavor. It was just, it was integrated into what I would consider, for me, it was an additive. It was additive into an already otherwise pretty rich life that I tried to carve out for myself.
Right.
That's it, and it's still a really important part of that balance for me, as we discussed earlier.
So you are now making, you've been talking about graphic art and design, but you're now making a living primarily as a photographer.
100%.
100%. And
I do some other sort of marketing consulting and some. I have a pretty eclectic skill set and background, and so I'm able to help to try to put some good ideas together out there. But yeah, I mean, most of my income is from photography and other types of storytelling, video occasionally, stuff like that.
And I kind of read, so you don't have to necessarily repeat it, but that you felt like not necessarily like photography was this thing that, lit you up right from the beginning, but you kind of like segged your way into it.
Yeah.
And it became this way to make some money and here and there. What does it do for you now in terms of like, now that it is your living and you have an artistic eye for it, is it just a job? Is it super fulfilling in its own right?
Oh,
does it get you around the world?
No, it's not. It's not just a job. I mean, it's like it's something I crave. I need to do something creative, and photography allows me. So all of these years climbing and all of these experiences I've had, the most important takeaway for me and the things that I remember most are the friends that I've met and the places that I've been, and the experience that I've had while climbing. I mean, there's a few distant memories of like, accomplishing some things like at the crag that are really important to me. But those are really, really minimal compared to like all the places I've been and all the friends that I've made and all of that. And so my takeaway from all of that is it's important for me to stay on the road and sort of, and be creative. Those, and climbing for me was a creative outlet when I was doing it. We were creating, bolting routes. We were looking at impossible looking lines and trying to figure out a pathway up them and trying to get that done. So I feel like that was a really creative endeavor. putting the bolts in the right place and blah, 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 kind of uncovering these roots. Right. And like, as my climbing kind of, as well, as the kids, i.e. Sharma and et cetera, Tommy and all those guys sort of came along and like sort of told us what time it was, showed us what time it was. It's like, okay, my job right now is kind of graphic design and product design, and that's happening largely behind a desk and kind of behind closed doors, right? And but hey, maybe if I turn to photography, I can still travel and stuff like that. And so that was a huge influence on the reason that I kind of switched up my creative endeavor.
When you're in the mode, when you're creating, what do you think is important to you about the medium in terms of your photography? Like, obviously, I guess the way I want to put this is that photography's changed so much, in the last 15 years with digital photography, with cameras, making life so much easier for everyone. Honestly, like a guy like Epperson has to look at a smartphone and just be like, oh God, where was this thing, 30 years ago? Yeah. Although he could do astounding things with slide film.
For sure.
But, and maybe made him a better photographer. That's a whole nother debate. But so what do you think you're looking for composing or whatever else that sets you apart, or you think might set you apart from the masses clicking out their photos? I mean, it's pretty easy to get a mediocre climbing photo these days if you've got an angle.
Yeah.
But do you have an idea, not necessarily what makes you better, quote unquote, but what are you trying to do when you're shooting that you think is going to make your stuff more noticeable, if you will?
Well, I'm trying to add. So I was a photo editor for years and years. At Black Diamond, that was one of my main tasks. So I was a photo editor, and I pored over climbing photography, and thousands and thousands of slides a year, and finding the right shot. It was like a needle in a haystack, right? And also going back, while I was studying graphic design, I also studied traditional photography. And it never occurred to me to be a photographer because it seemed to be extremely expensive. The people, the photographers that I knew were the people that my dad associated with, and they had, these giant, large format cameras and tripods and these dark rooms and sophisticated lighting. And it just didn't seem right for me. You know what I mean? Like, it seemed like something else. And I don't know why editorial Bill Hatcher and Beth Wald style photography didn't occur to me. And Epperson's a really good friend of mine, and Kevin Powell and these old school film shooters. Like, I don't know why it didn't occur to me to do it, but it just never did. I was just so wrapped up in climbing. But I understood photography from the film side of things, and spending time in the darkroom developing, artful photography. And what influences me in photography is probably, I'm most influenced by like 1950s and 60s fashion photography. People like Richard Avedon is a huge influence to me and on my work. And I don't even really look at what is happening in the outdoor or that community too much for inspiration. I mean, I love what Kempel and Ledzinski and all these guys are doing. Everyone has a great eye, but what I'm trying to do is a little bit different, and I'm playing a little bit more, I think, with shutter speed and blurred edges, and my work is definitely more impressionistic, and I think graphically really, really simple. I hope I strive for that. Like, the color space has to be right, and the background. I just don't like clutter. And it's sometimes on these limestone cliffs, it's tough to get that. I like a really clean shot. I don't know what sets me apart, but it's definitely trying to find the essence of what it feels like to be in this situation, and not necessarily just a snapshot of it. And I have failed miserably often, and I have succeeded wildly at times.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I am not that just F8 and be there guy. Like that's not really what drives me. You know, I want to find those moments that are really, really fleeting and hard to get.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want to do. And I want to get them in a way that's really unique. That's what I search for especially when I'm shooting climbing.
Are you shooting surfing now too?
Well, when I can,
other than as
when I can, but right now it's really funny, man, because I don't want to bother shooting when I'm at the beach because I want to be surfing.
Right. Well, it's the same reason you weren't.
I didn't
shooting
shoot
when
back
you were climbing.
back when I was climbing. It's the same thing, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's like I'm doing these trips with Sharma, and you know, I'm clearly like the worst climber on the trip, and I'm 40 years old, and I've got, you know, and I become obsessed with this other aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, what I'm obsessed about with surfing is the learning curve of surfing itself and being and participating in the sport. But you know, I've gone out on big days. I went out with Randy Levitt a few years ago and shot some really great big surf photos at Toto Santos on a legendary day. And you know, those photos are great. They're still some of my favorite work, you know. And if I went out I'd love to go out and shoot at Jaws or Chopo and on the right day or whatever, you know, like when I'm definitely not surfing, you know, when it's like 50-foot faces, that's the kind of stuff I want to shoot.
It seems like it'd be scary to even be out there. I mean, I guess everybody knows where to be, but every once in a while on YouTube, you see some you know, shot of where somebody's boat was in the wrong spot and it gets totally destroyed or flipped upside down.
Yeah,
or
you don't want to be there, and at the same time, like it feels like I'm not too stressed about it.
That's cool.
You know, I don't think that it feels stressful if you've spent time in the surf and you understand how these waves and how this stuff works. There's not that much to be worried about until it's probably too late.
Right. What kind of surf, like 5 what surfer are you? Would you put yourself at?
I'm approaching 5'10" probably.
Nice. That's pretty badass.
It's, you know, for an old dude, learned, you know, in his late 30s, and had a major fear of the ocean getting started. And it seemed very complex, and, you know, I couldn't even really swim when I started surfing. And
so what? Wait. We have to take a moment there. So what was it? I mean, was it just like, this looks like has multiple levels of challenge, so I'm gonna go learn how to swim while I surf and in this thing that I'm scared of?
I probably learned how to swim better by paddling around than I did like actually going to the swimming pool. I mean, I have a bunch of swimming or a bunch of surfing mentors that are just,
was it like circumstantial? Did you just have an opportunity to try it and love it, or did you like wake up one day and was like, that's my jam?
Circumstantial. Cool. Loved it, loved the challenge, loved the demystification of something that seemed so ominous and scary to me. And yeah, I mean, it, you know, systematically just demystified all the scariest things about it. Yeah. And it's amazing now, you know, it's just I feel 100% peaceful out there. I'm still not, you know, I really like hanging out with watermen and actually seeing how they operate in the water, and had a great experience last year to go to the French Polynesia and spend some time with some real watermen there and like really kind of just glean, you know, some
whatever you could.
Yeah, and it is a process of demystification. I mean, it's pretty predictable. You know what I mean? It's like, if you spend time in the ocean, it seems kind of absurd to be afraid of sharks, for instance.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, there's just like, I fly on an airplane. The drive, you know, let alone in Mexico, it's definitely the most dangerous part of the drive. Is definitely the most dangerous part of the experience. But in Oregon, it's arguable that the driving from Portland to the beach, that 70-mile stretch, is way more dangerous than the surfing. You know, and that's something that just becomes routine, right?
Well, and we should know that as climbers, because we get the same thing from the people outside looking in.
Yeah.
You know, that you were all out there risking our lives. It's like, no, I went to rifle for 3 hours today and did 3 pitches. Like, I'm fine.
Definitely.
Yeah. Like, I'm gonna
really
be okay.
risky.
Yeah.
You know?
But, you know, you like to let them believe it's, you know, I just went out and like risked my life.
Yeah, I guess. Sure. But it's like going to the climbing gym. I mean, are you really, you know, it's like, no, it's not really that risky.
Well, that's cool. We could talk for another hour about this because I just read Bill Finnegan's Barbarian Days.
Oh, sweet!
Like I just finished it.
It's
like
kind of
going
making the rounds, right?
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
What a great book. I wonder if it's out there. I haven't read it, but someone who can talk about climbing like that. I don't know if it's out there. I just finished it and I was kind of thinking like he talked about surfing in a way. I mean, I've surfed a handful of times and just so compelling and just kind of so nailed it all.
Yeah.
For a wider audience.
Yeah. I have not read it.
You know, without kind of treading in the cliches and sort of using that, like I just said, like what everybody thinks about it. It's good for business to let everybody think that way about it.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty amazing book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
It's a lifestyle choice, you know?
Well, I've done a lot of talk about the similarities to climbing in that sense. It's a lifestyle sport. Or sport, whatever you want to call it. And it's also got that like main vein addiction quality that
for sure
very few things have the way climbing and
for
the way
sure.
surfing does.
I mean, it's crazy now. It's not enough for me to just go out and surf in the waves. Now I'm like at the point where it's like, there's no swell, you know, it's like, wait, when's the swell coming? You know? And it's like, how was your trip to Mexico last week? And I was just, you know, I'm just like, hey, it was great. We had 3 proper swells come through and like, you know, 8 out of 25 days of really, really great surfing, you know, where it was really pumping and it was fun, you know?
That's not troubling. Like the whole waiting around, like nothing happening. Cause I mean, I always joked, it's like surfing's like if, you know, you just go to rifle one day and it's not there. And then the next day it's not there. And the next day it's not there. And then it's there, but it's actually only 20 feet tall.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, I know. And you know, it's like all of that is part of it.
You heard it was there.
And part of that is also learning who you are and dealing with disappointment. And, you know, it's like you can spin all these experiences that we put ourselves into, you can spin them negatively or positive. And I think I'm just inherently like pretty positive guy. So it's like nobody wants to sit on a plane, but I think of like sitting on a plane as just an opportunity to stay chilled out.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like you have to stay chilled out and just not worry about when you're landing, just like minute by minute, right? So you just sit there and just kind of meditate on this idea that you can't change it. You just have to come to peace with it. And if you fight it, the flight ends up just being so long, right?
Right.
So,
or you make everyone else miserable too.
Yeah, because you're all like fidgety and stuff.
I don't know that I've ever really pushed anybody on this, so I'm going to try it. You know, you've got this place in history of climbing. You're not, I don't think you're not a Messner type name or anything like that.
Yeah.
You've got this place in the history of climbing. You were there in the beginning of the sport climbing, you know, the bouldering craze also. You guys here, you know, with Joe's Valley and some of these places. I mean, it was post Waco, but still. What do you think, like, maybe a moment of pride in your legacy? I don't know if we're talking about a route you did or a place you developed or something you think you added to the culture. Do you ever think about that without being too modest?
Well, I just think, you know, and this is something that I learned from Bill Boyle, you know, that mentor that was, you know, 15 or so years older than I was. He was a psychologist and he always just said, you'll always be judged by the body of your work. You know what I mean? Always. And so it's like, you know, and that was in terms of like, whether you know how you did a Chaucy route or whatever, you know, it's like, you'll always be looked at. My legacy will be the body of my work. You know, it's like, I mean, I think people can pinpoint a few things that sort of gives me a little bit of street cred, but ultimately I think the people that know me the best and that know my history will look back on how just the different places that I had some kind of an influence, the overall body of the work.
Right.
From developing areas to the documenting the new ones these days, and products,
right?
The earliest bouldering mats and the shoe development and Wiregate carabiners. I was on that team, when that was all. It was Andrew McLean's idea, but it was like our team at Black Diamond that did that. Sure. That made that a reality. And there was a lot of deliberation about whether or not Wiregate carabiners would ever have a place in the market. Right. And so things like that, I think I have a pretty wide reaching imprint on the development of the sport, and especially indoor climbing.
Right. Yeah. Cause you were part of some early hold companies.
Pusher.
Yeah. You were part of Pusher.
Yeah.
Right.
And we were the first company to actually make holds that you couldn't hold on to. And, you make big holds, and what eventually influenced volumes and things like that. I mean, but slopey holds that you couldn't really hold on to, and went from like these grips to features and things like that, right. Influenced by what we were doing outside.
Yeah. Or wanted to do outside.
Yeah. And now, indoor climbing it's the new way. I mean, now we have climbing is going to be part of the Olympics.
Right.
And it's influencing urban culture, and, urban culture is influencing the sport of climbing, and those worlds are colliding now. And it's really important for our community to pass along a really environmentally conscious ethos to the people that come into the sport, I think, and try to hopefully through climbing the world can become even a better place.
Well, awesome. We're good, man. I really appreciate you sitting down, Boone. And we hadn't met before a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And although we've got, as usual in this climbing world, we have multiple mutual friends.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you giving us an hour. It's been awesome talking to you.
For sure. Yeah, my pleasure. It's been great.
Okay, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Boone for sitting down. Very generous with his time and forthcoming with his thoughts. Kind of living the dream life, that guy. I love talking to a guy for whom sport climbing 13B anytime, anywhere would be a little bit of a downgrade for him. Still a life dream goal over here at the Enormocast. But anyhow, moving on. It's getting to be springtime in the Rockies, lovers. So remember, stay alive again in 2017 by being safer than you were last year. Yes, safer this season. And start, of course, by checking your knot.
Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of your women. That is good. That is good.